I'm here with Amy Wheeler from Optimal State. And Amy, I want to thank you for joining me today and giving us some of your time.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I've been really looking forward to meeting you in person. I've been watching you for years.
Yeah, well, likewise. And so I'm excited to actually get a chance to talk to you. So I guess one of the reasons why, I first became aware of you is because you're what I would consider maybe like second or third generation of American teachers who have studied with TKV Desikachar at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. And so part of this kind of younger wave of yoga therapists in the West. And you might know I already had like Larry Payne, Gary Kraftstow, Richard Miller on the podcast. And I see you, and maybe I'll include myself in your peer group. We're part of a younger generation who's keeping these teachings alive. And so I always love to hear that kind of yoga teacher origin story. Like, how did you get interested in yoga at first? What drew you to it?
When I first came to yoga, I had been a track and field athlete, a heptathlete, which is high jump, long jump, shot put, hurdles, 800 meters, 200 meters, and javelin.
Wow.
So I came to yoga from a very athletic perspective. And, like a lot of people, we started in the body. And so I did that for about a year, a lot of vinyasa flow, Iyengar, that type of thing, where I could really feel my muscles working. And then after about a year, I thought, well, I want to go to India and see what this is all about. And so I went to the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram in 2001 for a three week, it was called the Silver Jubilee. And it was basically an anniversary, I think a 25th anniversary of Krishnamacharya's passing.
Mm.
And so for 3 weeks, we got to study with, all the top people, 10 hours a day from KYM, including Mr. Desikachar. And I fell in love. It was at that moment that I was like, oh, this is not about having an athletic body and a fit body. They were chanting, they were doing pranayama, they were doing meditation, they were doing deep philosophical lectures on the Yoga Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita. And I was like, oh, I am so in.
Mm.
So that was, my first, what I consider real yoga experience happened at the Silver Jubilee in Chennai.
How did you end up there if you were participating in more kind of physical asana type classes? How did you end up at the KYM in the first place?
Well, I had heard that Mr. Iyengar's teacher and Patabi Joyce's teacher was Krishnamacharya. So I thought, well, I'll go to the source,
Mm.
right? But what you find when you go to the KYM is that it's actually very, very different than Iyengar or Ashtanga. But I didn't know that. So I just thought I was kind of going to the source of Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and Ashtanga, only to find something very, very different.
Interesting. That's really similar to my story. Practicing Ashtanga Vinyasa, finding out after a time that it didn't really work for my body, and then having older Ashtanga teachers tell me, well, you should go check out Iyengar yoga because it's more therapeutic, but they had the same teacher. Going there and finding a completely different approach, and then starting to get really curious. Well, if they had the same teacher, how is this possible that the styles are so different? And that got me interested in Krishnamacharya, which led me to Desikachar. So interesting. I think it's great that you went thinking that you might be getting some kind of strong physical practices, but were happy to find something new.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been a spiritual seeker and a philosophical thinker and kind of, never really fit in with my peers because I was always wanting to hang out with people 20 years older than me
Mm.
ever since I was little. So it wasn't surprising to me that I fell in love with it so quickly within a day or two, because it met so many of my needs beyond the physical body.
Mm. So after that, well, actually, in that first 3-week program, did you ever get a chance to personally interact with Mr. Desikachar?
Yes. So, on the very first day I was walking to class and I saw this man who was running. He was looked like he was floating, and he had a long white dhoti on and a simple light green collared shirt. And I thought, wow, that guy looks like he's floating across the street. And when I got into the first session, they introduced him as Mr. Desikachar. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's him. And he was so humble and so soft spoken. And there was no pomp and circumstance. He was not allowing anybody to, touch his feet or worship or anything like that. And I really liked that about him, that he was just such a simple human being without all the image and, all the asmita. And then he gave us a meditation where he asked us to reflect on the relationship between responsibility and freedom. And so we did some pranayama. He introduced the topic of reflection. We took about 15 minutes, and then we all had to write down what our idea was about the relationship between freedom and responsibility. Then he went up on stage and read them and critiqued them, and I just really, really liked it. So that was my first time being in his presence, and it wasn't a personal one-on-one interaction, but I've had many, many personal interactions with him because I went back 7 different times for anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks, and was very, very fortunate to be invited into his home and study with him and his family. And one of the things about this younger generation of yoga/yoga therapy people in our tradition is that we got so much concentrated time, like 8 and 10 hours a day, where for 30 days in a row, where different people from the family and high level people like Dr. NC would come in and teach us. And when I talk to people like Larry Payne and some others, they might get 3 1-hour lessons in a week. So if they were there for 6 months or something, they may have gotten 20 lessons or something. And I think that there was this window in time where we got really, really fortunate to get a ton of really high quality time and high quality teachings with Mr. Deskshar and his family.
Now, just going back to that recollection, did you say that he was wearing a white goatee?
Dhoti.
Oh,
I
dhoti.
could.
I think that threw me off. I was like, wow, I never seen him with any facial hair, but a dhoti in a green shirt and
Yes.
kind of seemingly floating across the road.
Yeah, he was very graceful in his body
Yeah.
at that time. Yeah.
I'm also interested in this meditation/reflection exercise that he had you do. So responsibility and freedom. How, what did he draw that from? Was that something that he was just maybe thinking about, or did he reference the Yoga Sutra? I'm just curious, where that comes from.
He did not. I mean, looking back at that 3-week Silver Jubilee and knowing now what I know about what was going on, I mean, this was in 2001, but there was a strong undercurrent, which I have now come to understand better, of who is going to take this lineage, who is going to take responsibility for it, and is taking that responsibility for this tradition, this lineage, going to somehow impact anyone's freedom who decides to take this on, meaning you have to take care of the tradition or the lineage. You can't just, not take care of it. And so I think those ideas, even in 2001, were starting to weigh on him, that what's going to happen now?
Right, because in taking responsibility for maintaining the integrity of the lineage, it would require a lot of personal sacrifice.
And he had done that. He knew. He said, don't become a yoga teacher, it's too hard. So he really sacrificed his life for all of us to benefit, and he knew that whoever was going to take that over after him, I think he knew, that it was going to require great sacrifice.
Hmm. And so I think you said, was it over the next 10 years you continued to go back?
Yeah, I fell in love. I was a goner, and went back many times to study with different programs and do 4 to 6 week internships at the KYM, for yoga therapy. And it, in spite of all the trips I made to India, they were coming over to the US a lot too. So for our yoga therapy program, we had 6 modules of 12 days each. So again, we just got this really potent, concentrated um, teachings given to us, and it was an amazing time.
Hmm. So that's, I mean, 10 years is quite a lot of time to develop as a practitioner and teacher. Did your focus shift? I'm interested, like, from where you started out with this kind of coming to yoga as a jock to where you are now with your optimal state system and this strong focus on mental health. I'm interested in that journey and how you found your way to where you are now. Like, what was most interesting to you at the KYM and in yoga, and how that led to where you are now?
For me, when I found the KYM and these teachings, everything I had ever loved suddenly came under one umbrella.
Mm.
So it's not that I developed into something else. I was like, oh my gosh, it's all here. I love the human physical body. I love anatomy. I love kinesiology. I love physiology. And I had a PhD in psychology
Oh,
before
you
I even
did.
went. Yeah,
Mm.
before I even went to the KYM, I had done that. And I had been a sports psychologist for many Olympic teams and athletes. And Descatar really liked that. He was very interested in that.
Mm.
Um, so the psychology piece, my father is a minister. And so I've always had a really strong faith and been very interested in God and the divine and specifically the mystics. So when I found KYM, it was like one thing took all the things I love and put it into a framework, the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, that made sense to me. It just all worked. And so as I, kind of moved towards building the optimal state yoga therapy program, I was really able to see from all my years of psychology and kinesiology, because I'm still a kinesiology professor after 23 years now.
Mm.
I could see how the psych and the kines were just beautifully mapped onto this system of yoga, and how the gunas actually merge with polyvagal theory, and how the somatic experience of trauma actually is explained through yoga, right? Like I could, in the Panchamaya model. So it still is, if you can't tell, super exciting to me. I'm like waving my hands all over right now when I'm
Mm.
talking, because it's such a miracle to me that it's all in one place.
Yeah, that I really resonate with that. That's what it felt like for me too. It was like a whole approach to life that included every aspect of life that I was interested in, that I held dear. And that's something that I couldn't find in my own culture. Everything was so segmented. There was spirituality was over there, physical exercise and sport was over here, psychology was there, and everything has been kind of dismembered over the years. I think at one time in Western culture, it was more together. But I think over time, we became such specialists. Um, and so everything's like very fragmented and segmented. And I think it's starting to come back together a little more now in the West with things like somatic psychotherapy and yeah, maybe even a more spiritual approach to psychology with depth psychology and archetypal psychology, that kind of thing. So it's maybe starting to come back together, but then here's this tradition where it was never, well, I think in some respects, yoga was broken apart. But in this particular lineage, it's like the whole picture is there and been preserved.
Exactly. And that's why I was so grateful that I kind of fell into this quite early in my yoga career because for me, it didn't have to be segmented off into just asana or, oh, those people, they're the meditators, that at the KYM, there is this beautiful weaving of all the different tools of yoga where you're chanting while doing asana, as you know,
Hmm.
where you're doing an active meditative reflection while even going for a walk in nature. And then that's considered meditation, right? The different ways you can adapt all the tools in the toolbox are just so cool to me.
Mm. Okay, well, this is a great opportunity speaking to you because you do have such a kind of Western scientific or psychological background. So you've really got that foundation now. And you mentioned polyvagal theory and the gunas. And just to take that example, could you talk a little bit about how theories that people are starting to come to in the West now are already present in yoga? So let's take polyvagal and the gunas. Could you talk a little bit about that and explain how they correlate?
Sure. So one of the things I've tried to do with the optimal state yoga therapy system is to help simplify the teachings. It took, you know, 20 years of study for me to really deeply understand them. And people can't travel to India 7 times. They can't be away from their families for 6 weeks at a time. And there's so much good and useful stuff in here that needs to get out there. So I basically took the guna model and gave each one of the gunas, a color, rajas, tamas, sattva, so that people from the West, they still will give honor to India and to the ancient teachings, but they will have a very simple language about how to communicate these concepts. So for
Mm.
example, pitta, I taught it, pitta vata kapha for 20 years at my university, and students, it just went right over their head. I could see their eyes glazing over. But as soon as I said pitta means red zone, vata means white zone, kapha means blue zone, now these kids are walking across campus, and sattva is gold zone. Now these kids are walking across campus like, Dr. Wheeler, I'm in gold zone.
Mm.
For 20 years, no kid ever told me they were in sattva. But the
Hmm.
moment I put it in a language and these simple colors that they could understand, they love it. They grasp onto it. So that's really been my thing is let's honor India. Let's be honest about where this came from. Let's give credit where credit is due, but let's put it in a simple form that Westerners can understand. So I think the same thing with polyvagal theory. I think this is the brilliance of what Stephen Porges and people like Marlisa Sullivan have done. They have taken some really complex topics and concepts and really boiled them down into these simple graphs that people can understand. And it's just like wildfire now.
Mm.
I just yesterday I did a Google search of polyvagal theory, and I found like 10 amazing graphics that describe it so beautifully that people had come up with and posted on my Facebook page. So I think the beauty of what we're seeing now with the gunas and with polyvagal theory is how simple we've been able to translate that so that we can get the message out. And those people who want to study for 20 years, have at it. But that doesn't mean a school kid in 3rd grade in Arkansas can't also benefit.
Hmm.
So kind of back to your question, how do I see the gunas kind of interacting with polyvagal theory?
Well, maybe
Oh,
there may be some people out there who aren't familiar with the gunas yet. And
okay.
so maybe if you could just give a little brief intro to that model and what each of them maybe points toward or the qualities of each.
Sure. So, everything in the whole natural world is made up of what we call the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. It's very similar to traditional Chinese medicine and the 5 element theory. So when we take these 5 elements and start to combine them to physical form and matter, when we combine earth and water in the body, we call that kapha. When we combine, when we have more fire, we call that more pitta in the body. And when we have more air and space, we say, oh, this person has a lot of vata. And every human being in their birth constitution has different concentrations or amounts of earth and water or fire or air and space. So you've got the birth constitution in your body, but then you've also got your lifestyle, and how does your lifestyle impact how much fire you have? Like right now I'm having some coffee. I went and did a workout this morning. I had a sports psych call right before you where I was very focused and fiery in my mind, right?
Mm.
So I've got a lot of fire going on today, right? So my lifestyle, depending on how I design it, can add more earth or water or fire or air or space. And when you have that, you can tend to get out of balance in all these different directions. So what we're trying to do, at least with the Optimal State Yoga Therapy program, is help people to recognize when they're getting too much fire or when they're getting too much water and earth and feel like they're stuck in the mud, or when they have, transported up into the stratosphere, into air and space, and they're really, distracted and not grounded.
Spaced out.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So that's how we see the 5 elements show up in the body. We call it Vata, Pitta, Kapha. But Patanjali, when he or she or they talk about the gunas of the mind, now they take those 5 elements and they condense it down to Rajas, Tamas, Sattva. Rajas being more air and space and fire, kind of very energized and excited or fiery or expansive mind. That would be Rajas. Versus Tamas, the opposite would be the earth and the water. And this would be the heavy, lethargic, tamasic, cloudy thinking. So Patanjali is specifically referring to the gunas as they show up in the mind, and that we don't want to be too far into the Rajas direction, but we don't want to be too far into the Tamas direction. We actually want to pacify the Rajas and Tamas, let them go, so that we are just left simply with what we call Sattva, or this pure state of consciousness and clarity and being, really.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Now, do you think it's incorrect to say that sattva is a state of balance?
I don't prefer that definition, actually. I
Yeah,
mean, I think we are in balance when we're in Sattva, but I think it's the removal of Rajas and Tamas, not somewhere in the middle of Rajas and Tamas. Does that
right.
make sense?
Yeah, no. So it's maybe a return to an original state of some kind.
I believe that. I feel when we unpeel the misperceptions and the image and the ego identification and the aversions and the attachments and the fear, when we remove that or pacify that, we are left with who we truly are. And that's what I think sattva is just peeling all that stuff off so you can remember who you really are.
Mm. So would it be accurate to say that the mm, Purusha, the quality of Purusha is sattva?
Yes, very much so. That there are, your mind has many different ways of being, from what we call the manas mind, which is very connected to the external world and all the sensory objects, and then coming back, closer to what we call the asmita mind, which is I, me, mine, survival mind. And then we move further back and we get to the buddhi mind, where you're a little bit closer to, I kind of remember who I was. And then we go back to, the pratyaya mind, which is this fluid, clear mind that, can be very present, all the way back to a sattvic mind, which is closest to Purusha. So, the goal of our yoga is to take ourselves from manas kind of back through that chain, back through the asmita and the buddhi and the pratyaya, and get back to having our mind simply reflect the truth of who we are.
Mm. Would you say that could we correlate Rajas and Tamas with yin yang, like active, passive principles and those qualities that are associated with yin yang?
I think we can. I think it's a great analogy. And then Sattva is that tiny line that's
Yeah.
between the yin and the yang. And that's a very hard line to find, you know?
Yeah, it's a very delicate tightrope to walk or something. You're gonna yeah. It's very difficult to remain there. So do you think that's the goal? Like, I mean, is that even realistic for people to always be in a sattvic state? Or is it always a
No,
matter of like noticing and correcting, responding?
that's what we teach in the optimal state is that staying in sattva as a householder is nearly impossible. I mean, you're not going to be able to do that.
Let's
You
just say impossible,
okay? It's
right?
impossible. All right, I agree. But noticing, excuse me, but noticing when I'm starting to get out of balance and knowing what to do to bring myself back towards sattva. That's really what I'm interested in, is not how we're going to stay there, because as we said, it's impossible, but do I notice, like, Amy, you probably don't need any more coffee this morning, right?
Hmm.
Or, wow, I'm feeling really lethargic today. Instead of melting into my couch, I think I'm going to go out for a hike, even though I don't feel like it, right?
Mm.
So just noticing when we're getting out of balance in a certain direction and then taking action to pull ourselves back closer to balance.
Mm. Do you think is it useful to maybe simplify things for people and say like and make a correlation between something like, let's say, anxiety and a rajasic state and depression and a tamasic state? Is that just overly simplifying it, or is that making it relatable to people so they can start to get a grasp of what it feels like to be out of balance?
I think that's a first step. But going back to the yin yang analogy, within yang there is the little dot of yin, and within, you see the opposite in there. So, in a very, very simplistic way, yes, depression is correlated with being tamasic, and um, anxiety more rajas. But when we actually get to the cause of why am I depressed, is it because I am lethargic and sedentary and truly have these really heavy qualities that I've cultivated over a period of time through my lifestyle choices? Or am I depressed because I've been in rajas for so long that I've completely depleted myself and now there's no juice left and I've fallen down into tamas? And for me, those are two very different types of depression. How I'm going to work with someone who has the sedentary, lethargic, blues type of depression is a totally different practice than somebody who's depleted and basically, fallen into depression because they have nothing left to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as you're talking about how it's a lot like the yin yang, where there's like a drop of the opposite in it, that kind of thing. Thinking about depression, where I think sometimes I've felt this where maybe my body feels really heavy or I feel quite unmotivated, but my mind is actually really overactive and overthinking things, and that seems to send me into more of like a shutdown type state, and I really have to work to get myself out of that. So there's that, like, there's an active, maybe mental energy going on, but in the body feeling like really heavy and just unmotivated.
See, this is why I love the KYM tradition, though. We have very specific things we would do for someone that had really heavy somatic feelings, but a lot of agitation in the mind. And we would target the practice for how do we soothe and pacify the mind, but move the body. And, there's a technique you've probably learned also called Angalaghavan, where you do all the movements only on exhale, and every inhale is a place of stillness. So I just love that they have somehow Krishnamacharya and family have come up with these really amazing techniques that can address the different parts of our system simultaneously.
Mm. That's a new one to me, actually. The Angalangala. How do you say that?
on. It's a lightness of the limbs. They also use it for weight loss. um, but yeah, I think I have a YouTube video of it I could send you if you're interested.
Oh, great. Well, and I think maybe some of the people listening too would like to see some of this in action.
Yeah, yeah. I teach it to my college students. They love it. And it just soothes their mind, and it is still a hard workout for their body.
Hmm. Great. So we talked a little bit. I mean, we've kind of talked about optimal state yoga training. I'm interested if you could speak about how you've brought what you learned in India back to America and created a business from it. And so, if you could talk a bit about your business and how you're engaging with the world these days.
You know, I'm going to just say I'm a very lonely solopreneur. My husband and I do it together, so I'm not really solo, but I feel like I don't fit in anywhere. If you'd ask the Indians, I'm probably not doing it quite perfectly enough in terms of tradition and, you know, just really making sure that I protect the teachings perfectly. But when you talk to the Western people that I work with here at California State University for 23 years, the physiologists, the kinesiologists, the biomechanists, they think I'm this crazy yoga girl. Like,
Mm,
who is this lady with the chanting in her office? And, so I'm like this unicorn, and I don't fit anywhere.
mm,
But I really can't be anything but who I am and how I have emerged. I'm incapable of trying to please another and not be true to myself. It's always been something in me that I just can't do. So I'm a lonely unicorn, and what my plan has been is to recruit other lonely unicorns who are also very interested in this bridge, like standing on the bridge in the middle where you understand the Western science, you can talk about it, you know the muscles of the body, you understand psychology, and you can turn around on the bridge and have a total conversation about Sanskrit and chanting and Bhagavad Gita, and you can chant the Yoga Sutras word by word, all 4 chapters. Like, I like to be able to flip it and go that direction too. And so whoever I talk to, I can talk their language. And then I'm the person standing on the bridge in the middle, basically translating for the two teams.
mm.
And so when I developed Optimal State, that was my goal, is to be able to talk to both sides and let the other one know what the other team is thinking or talking about, and then training people to do the same, because I do honor the teachings, and I do feel like we should not be culturally appropriating this information and pretending we came up with it, and we need to give honor to India and to the teachings. And there's a lot of people here in the West that can't completely understand them in the most extreme traditional sense.
Mhm.
So that's really my goal. And I just said to a girlfriend the other day, like, should I stop this? Am I crazy? What am I thinking? It's too hard. Because it does feel like a very lonely place. And so if you're listening and you're a unicorn, contact me. I want to know you.
Well, I really relate to that. I was talking to someone yesterday who described himself as a recovering Ashtangi and Ashtanga Vinyasa, the Patabi Joyce system. And, one of the things excuse me, one of the things that we were talking about was missing the kind of community that forms around a shared practice like that. And how that's something that I think we all really long for, and that we're missing in the West now, that people aren't gathering in the churches as much. um, and when you start to get into this other stream of the lineage, like the Desikachar stream, where it is all about adapting yoga to the individual, uh, it's more focused on one-to-one work, although we can adapt to a group situation as well. But like, in some sense, we're then all doing our own practice alone. And where's the opportunity for us to come together? And that's something that I've struggled with too, feeling like a bit of I describe myself as a lone wolf. And I've often thought about creating a lone wolf club, which is kind of paradoxical or ironic or something, that, we're all kind of like independent people, but we still need communitas. Like we still need to get together and share things that we're learning or interested in. And
Well,
so,
can I ask,
yeah,
are unicorns invited to the Lone Wolf Club?
I think
Um,
unicorns would be totally invited as well. And like for me, it's like you said, just not being able to kind of conform to one particular approach or something because it's more accepted or mainstream or popular. It's like you do yoga enough and you can't help but just be yourself, right? It's
right,
like where we started with this, getting to that original state, or getting closer to our soul, allowing the soul to express more and more as everything else starts to fall away, all the conditioning. And at the end of the day, you're kind of left as a unique individual. And that can feel maybe lonely in a world that wants us to pick a team
right,
and wear the team colors and conform, conform, conform. And I guess for me, it's just a bit of a different blend. For me, it's maybe more of a blend of yoga, psychology, and shamanism.
mm, yeah,
And I find that there's not a lot of people who share interest in those things in the kind of depth that I want to go to.
right.
Like the full picture of yoga, because within that is everything. And wow, like psychology really helps my Western mind understand my makeup, but it also helps me understand the concepts that are presented in yoga, especially Patanjali. And so people like you, I think, are really important, who are helping to bridge the worlds and help with that communication, because there's a lot of stuff in yoga that is really, really useful to us today. And that is like some kind of crazy miracle, or an affirmation that we're not so different than we've always been. Like we're still dealing with a lot of the same essential issues, right?
Exactly. I mean, when you look at, just say, for example, the four symptoms of suffering that Patanjali maps out in the sutras, that you may have dukkha, that's contraction or feeling in your heart. You may have daurmanasya, like a very negative, dark, heavy mind. You may have angamejayata, physiological agitations in the body. You may have shvasa, prashvasa, that holding after inhale kind of thing going on when you're walking around all rigid. I mean, how long ago was that created? And yet it's still so true for my college students today. I mean, that's remarkable to me.
I know. And like Patanjali codified that stuff before social media, before the internet, before all these
Right.
other things that we kind of point to as the causes of our suffering as modern people. It's like, well, no wonder we're suffering. We've got Facebook and Instagram and all this like comparison and competition and distraction and all this stuff. I go, well, look, this was written like somewhere around 2000 years ago, and they're talking about all these things now that we're recognizing as like symptoms of trauma and all that, like trembling of the limbs, disturbed breathing, you said, dark thoughts, and a feeling of, yeah, feeling constricted or discontented, like at a fundamental level, dukkha. And it's incredible. So the practices are that Patanjali offers and that Krishnamacharya and Desikachar offered are in response to these symptoms of being a human being in any time, any place. Like it's something that we share. And so how can we make use of these practices that are already there and have been developed to such a refined level? We need people to translate them, right? And to make them relevant.
Well, I think we do. And that's my goal. And I have received a lot of pushback, honestly.
Hmm.
People who are concerned that in the translation, there's cultural misappropriation happening, and wanting to make sure credit is given where this is from and don't whitewash it. And I agree with all that. I think it's very important that we do not disconnect the tree from its roots. And as Deskachar taught us, we have to put it in a language that the person who's sitting in front of us can understand, and that we are given permission and actually instructed to do that, to look at this human being and say, how can they best comprehend and take in this information and use it in their lives in a very practical way.
Hmm.
So it's a tough road to walk and figure out where that line is, where you're being true to the teachings and giving honor, and saying, yeah, my college students tend to understand the red, white, blue, gold zone system better than Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Sattva. Those
Hmm.
words never made sense to them.
Yeah. And I think, like translating the language into something that we can easily communicate and people can more easily understand, that to me just makes sense. I think the only time we run the risk of cultural misappropriation is when we kind of like cherry pick things from the tradition that we're comfortable with, and we leave out the stuff that we're uncomfortable with. And so something that comes up for me and something I've been trying to like, I've just been kind of doing my own inquiry around it. Um, is in the Yoga Sutra, we've got this concept of brahmacharya. And stuff that's been happening in the yoga scene has really got me reflecting on this again. And what I've been trying to do is get down to the root of it, like looking at that word, which is often translated as celibacy or sexual continence, something like that. And people would say, well, that's because Patanjali was prescribing an aesthetic lifestyle where you're giving up sex and things like that. It's not for householders, it's for renunciates, is often the argument that's made. Um, and so I'm going, okay, well, what actually does the word say? Because I find that's the most interesting thing to do with Sanskrit. It's like look at what the word actually means at its root. And I'm interested, before I give you my theory, of how you deal with a concept like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'll just tell you what I have come to after years of reflection on this very same topic. Um, the I just think of it as in service of Brahma. That if we are making love and in a relationship where both parties have equal power and are in agreement and are loving each other in the highest form of honoring the divine, I think it's okay that we're having sex as yogis.
Mm,
Now, if I'm using my power differential to manipulate people and control people and get them to do things with me that are not in their highest good, are not in the spirit of Brahma, then I don't actually think that's a very good thing. So, some people may call that too rigid. Some people may say that's not rigid enough. But for me, I truly believe that um, it's it should be in service of the higher good of all parties involved, long term, not just in that moment.
mm. Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about it like in context of where it shows up in the yamas and niyamas, and thinking about, okay, what does that word actually mean? We've got Brahma, which is like the absolute, another name for God, maybe, um, but maybe a bigger idea of God than we sometimes have in the West, one that
Mhm,
includes everything. And Acharya, which I guess I understand to be like, as it's applied to names like Krishnamacharya, someone who knows or teaches through their lived experience, is the way I understand it.
yeah,
Does that sound about right?
yeah, yeah. Love it.
So when I put those words together, what I get maybe is someone who's on a path to knowing God, something like that, or someone who's living a life in accordance with this higher goal of really understanding life. on its like deepest levels, like the spiritual path, maybe we could
Yeah.
say. Now, I don't know how that directly applies to sex, if that was something that came up in the commentaries, because it there's no mention of sex in the word, right? So it must be an
Yeah. I
interpretation.
think it maybe it's that your love is to the divine, your commitment is to the divine, your instead of, this human thing that we do together to satisfy ourselves temporarily. I'm not sure. Just
Hmm.
guessing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a curious thing. And I mean, it's something like in me wanting to be true to the tradition is really like trying to understand all these concepts and not just kind of brush it aside or interpret it in a way that really isn't accurate but makes me feel more comfortable. um like, so brahmacharyas, then people say, well, it just means to be like monogamous or something. And so people have all kinds of different interpretations that I think are based more on their comfort level with the idea of celibacy or whatever it actually means. I don't know.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna kind of just suggest that, is it possible that just like the Bible, it was translated by different people at different times with different agendas, and what we're actually seeing today is this culmination of thousands of years of people saying or projecting onto it what they think it is. So in
Mhm.
some sense, I know this is going to be controversial, but in some sense, maybe I do want to cherry pick a little bit here and there, because I don't actually agree with what all these thousands of years of commentators have decided it means. Like,
Mhm.
I same with the Catholic Church. There's no you can't have sexual intercourse except for procreation. There is no recreation. Like, okay, most of the Catholics I know are not down with that, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And so, is that cherry picking, or is that just the reality of, we're not going to be so dogmatic all the time in every single moment? I don't know.
Hmm. Well, I guess like for me, it's kind of like what you're saying is that there's been these commentaries over the years, and everyone bringing their own agenda to them. Some of them quite a religious agenda. People who are promoting that renunciate lifestyle. They're not talking to householders here. So are they overlaying their own interpretation on what Patanjali was actually pointing toward, which was maybe something like, we could say brahmacharya is being in service of the highest good or something. Um, so as that applies to sex, I think, well, I could look at the yamas and think about those in terms of sex as a whole. So non-harming, honesty, non-grasping, like not coveting, and those kind of things that are laid out there. And so think about it more holistically. Like if I'm looking at the topic of my sexual relationships, well, how do all of the yamas apply to that?
Right. And that's what Desikachar taught, actually,
Hmm.
that especially ahimsa is the foundation for all the other yamas and niyamas. And that's why it comes first. So in every one of those other ones that you look at it through the lens of ahimsa.
Hmm. So always coming back to non-harming and reflecting on, am I causing harm in
Right.
my actions? Yeah. Okay, I don't know how we ended up there, Amy,
I don't
but
either. It was such a great detour.
yeah, I'm really glad we went there. But we were talking about polyvagal theory and all that. But I'm
Wow, how
glad.
do we bring this back?
Well, I'm glad we covered that too. And it's just like it's where our conversation led us as practitioners at this kind of stage in our life, and dealing with some of the issues that are coming up in the world now around yoga.
Well,
Um,
another one, I don't know how much more time we have, but the thing that really is hard for me to grapple with is the idea of trauma informed yoga and yoga therapy versus the way that yoga has been taught for thousands of years with a guru and with a power differential and hierarchy and caste system. And I mean, it literally just makes my head explode, because
Mm,
I have a really hard time figuring out how I can honor the teachings and yet say, yeah, I'm not really into the hierarchy and the guru thing, and I actually believe in trauma informed yoga, and that we have to make people feel safe and secure, and it's almost, opposites of one another. So those kinds of things are what I spend a whole lot of time thinking about. I don't know about you.
mm. Well, I definitely think about, as a teacher, how to teach in a way that honors each individual person who's in front of me, teaching in a way that doesn't put myself on a platform as some kind of ideal to aspire to. I try not to teach in a way that's authoritative and dogmatic. Um, and I don't know, like, I look at the way the teachers that have helped me the most in the way they've related to me when I was learning. I look at the teachers who I see as problematic, so I learn from them as well, maybe learning what not to do, and seeing the kind of problems that that type of authoritarian, dogmatic, somatically dominant, all of these things that we're starting to pay attention to, how that negatively affects people. So I don't know what that has to do with how things were done traditionally or not. All I know is how, I was taught, what I can learn from those teachers. I look to Deskachar especially as a model of how to teach in a way that's really integral and responsible. Um, yeah, but in terms of the whole guru thing, I think, I don't know. I just feel like we're over that. Like we've outgrown that whole
I
uh,
think we
way
as
of
Westerners
relating.
have,
Hmm.
but I don't, when I travel around the world to different yoga conferences, it's alive and well outside the US.
Yeah, I know it's alive and well, but is it still working for people?
Oh, I don't, no, I don't think it is. But I
Yeah.
think there's kind of a culture clash right now.
Mm.
And the people who have grown up in a culture that has a little bit more dogma and a little bit more hierarchy, and
And
they
like
that
subservience to authority, right?
yeah, that's a part of who they are cellularly, and
Mm.
they honor that and value that and see the good things that can come from that. So when you crash in as an American and you're like, oh, we're all about trauma informed and no dogma and don't give away your power and use your somatic experience to direct yourself, and they're kind of like, what?
Mhm.
What are you talking about? Like there really is a culture clash going
Mhm.
on. And I think, if we stay in our bubble in the United States, we don't know that.
Mhm. Well, and I think there's this other thing that happens, right, in response to a lot of the issues that arise with that more maybe traditional way of teaching, um, is that the pendulum ends up swinging all the way to the other side, to the point where I think a lot of younger people aren't trusting any authority. Um, that people are unwilling to be in any relationship where there is a hierarchy of any kind, like even a hierarchy based on experience and knowledge.
Right.
Like that's just a reality. Some people have been around longer, they've been studying and practicing more, so they maybe know some stuff that could be useful to you. And so maybe at that point it's good to just like to listen to them and to respect their experience and their knowledge that they've accumulated over years, and like humble yourself to that or something, or be open to it. But I think like what often happens now is that people are saying, well, you know what, we don't need any teachers, we've got access to all the information that we need. It's like the internet has leveled the playing field and we can kind of make up our own thing. But what I'm starting to see with these younger people who have had access to all these different spiritual practices, like there's no barriers anymore, like everything's available, is they're starting to feel a little lost.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've got all of this stuff at their fingertips. It's like they're in the spiritual supermarket. And even in terms of like the doors opening up on psychology and psychotherapy, people are hearing about all of these different ideas and concepts on Instagram. There's Instagram psychotherapists who are doing all of this like education around stuff like polyvagal theory and trauma. And people have access to all this information, but I don't know how much they're able to actually apply it to their life. Like I wonder if it's just a lot of like information gathering, and there's maybe not enough guidance into how to like really apply it and how to make it relevant to your life. Because I mean, I get people coming to my workshops who say this, who go, you know what, I've gone to like so many different yoga trainings and there's all this stuff now, and like I've done Reiki trainings, yoga trainings, trauma informed stuff, blah 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 blah. And they're like, I don't actually know how it should work in my life. Like I don't know how to develop a practice for myself that feels coherent and makes sense. It's like there's too much
Uh,
choice, not enough guidance or something. I don't know.
I completely agree. And, I have students that I'm giving a lecture, and they're so busy making sure that their notebook is properly tabulated, and they've downloaded the audio file and they have it in the perfect Dropbox, that they literally are not being with me
Mm.
in the moment as I'm trying to convey a precious teaching, because they're so worried about grasping onto this notebook or this Dropbox link or something that they want to make sure they have for later. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
this
like
happens all the time. I'm like,
I see
hey,
it too. Yeah.
pay attention. I'm here. I'm with you. Let's be together right now.
Yeah, it's like they want to make sure that they capture all of the information, and to a point where they're not actually able to be present and receive the thing that's transmitted on a more subtle level,
Hmm.
right?
and
Like,
and experience together.
yeah, like being with you somatically in the room. And there's something that happens when we're together in a room. If the new theories about like the polyvagal theory and all that have taught us anything, it's that there's communication happening on a deeper level when we're together.
Neuroception.
Yeah. But if your
Yeah.
head's stuck in your laptop making notes, or you're worried about your phone getting the recording of the person talking, and you're thinking about how you're going to upload that and then share it to the Facebook group and all this stuff later, you're not actually being there and receiving uh, these other things, which is how we've kind of learned from each other for thousands and thousands of years, is kind of through osmosis, through picking up on body language and um, uh, like regulating each other's nervous systems by breathing together and being together, right?
Yeah, Deskacharya used to do this thing where he would get mad because he thought we were in our notebooks too much. Like we'd be head down, like scratching notes for hours, and all of a sudden he would get all angry at us and be like, "Put the notes away! No more notes for 3 days!" And we'd have to sit there for 10 hours a day, listening, being present, connecting, having mirror neurons, and not being able to write any of this juicy, amazing information down. And it would drive us crazy. We would just be like, we came all the way to India and we can't take notes. Are you kidding? But that was his way of saying, like, don't get caught up in those notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
Be here now.
Yeah, I was with a teacher once who said, "You're writing things down just so you can forget them."
Well, I tell you, Brian, I have 3 and 4 inch notebooks, a whole shelf full of them from KYM. I haven't I haven't opened them in years. You don't go back and learn that stuff out of the notebook. You
No,
don't.
no, but if you're actually there, not making notes, listening, picking up on things on a subtle level, you retain stuff that, I find when I'm doing my practice, these like teachers' voices will come to me as I'm doing my practice. It's like, oh my God, where did that come from? It's like they're in the room with me, and it's getting triggered somatically or something. All of these like memories that I've retained and like without even thinking about it, you know? It's like
I think that's
it's
exactly what's happening.
yeah, I think so
You
too.
you had a somatic experience at one time with this teacher, and the words, came across the room vibrationally and entered into your body, and now you're doing a somatic practice, and suddenly that's released again, that fragrance from that
Mm.
original flower.
Yeah, I've never actually like really thought about it too much until this moment, but we talk a lot about how we store trauma in the body, but we don't, I think, maybe talk enough about how we store positive experiences, like how we store love in the body and how that can also be released as we go through our somatic yoga practice. Like the only thing I ever hear people talk about is like we store trauma in the body and you do hip openers and you're going to have an emotional release and all this kind of thing. It's like, what about like when I breathe in deeply, open my arms up, and I remember, or I hear like a teacher's voice, the first time they ever taught me to do that or something, and the kind of generosity and care and love
Mhm.
that accompanies that, how that's released in my body. And, I get, yeah, how we store like the good things in our body too.
Yeah, I just had a lesson last night, and a student said, "Can a vasana be positive as well as negative?" And I think
So
that's what you're
Vasana is
talking.
like a imprint,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's the scent that's left over after the original event, and they get kind of imprinted into our body mind systems.
Mm.
And I said, of course, there's so many positive vasanas that are imprinted into you, and it's exactly what I hear you saying right now. That, well, why don't we focus on those more too?
Yeah, well, it's in, as I've kind of started learning more about psychology over the past few years, I just found, and then in like the zeitgeist too, with like people being more trauma informed and everything, I guess my biggest criticism of it is that it's often just focused on the negative. And maybe we've lost sight of the the good in us, which is something like coming back to Patanjali and yoga. I feel like it's like Patanjali always keeps his eye on the prize,
Mm,
which is like reconnecting to who you really are at your core, which is this state of sattva,
right.
the soul. Um, so that's something that I always try to keep in focus when I work with people is like, let's keep our eye on the prize here. We can talk about all of the stuff that's gone wrong in our life and how it's negatively impacting us now and all of that, but let's not lose sight of what's there at your core.
Yeah, that reminds me of the bird model from the Upanishads. That
The two
you know,
birds.
well, it's there's five different birds
Mm,
actually, but the deepest, most powerful, potent bird inside of you is that bird who knows joy, who experiences joy, who remembers joy, who is wanting to have more joy. And I, you know, when I learned that, I'm like, oh my gosh, where's the joy in my life? What am I doing here? I am working like a crazy woman, in this field of yoga, and yet I've forgotten the most important bird inside of me, which is my joy bird. Right,
mm,
so it's exactly what you're talking about, that you know it's great to process the trauma, digest it, try to let go of it, because we all have it. And also simultaneously, can we cultivate and grow the joy inside of us simultaneously?
mm. And I think this is something that happens to people who are working in helping professions.
Mhm.
Is that we can kind of get mired in the heavy stuff, right?
Yeah, I
And
know I
maybe
do.
and I think maybe there's a danger to that, because if we're so focused on it, maybe it's because like we're so excited about all this new research that's coming out and these new models that are being developed and approaches to working with trauma, like all of that. I see people in the field getting like really excited about all this stuff. It's like, oh, finally, like an answer to some of these issues that we've been noticing, you know, so there's like an excitement to it. So I get it. You know, it's a new and exciting thing. You can add it to your tool belt and feel like you've got like something else to draw on to help people. I totally understand that. But I also wonder if some of the danger is that by focusing on that stuff so much, we can somehow inadvertently help people to identify more with the trauma, right? Which is just another kind of ego problem or identity problem.
Yeah, it's an asmita problem of
Yeah.
I am my trauma. This happened to me. I will be ruined forever. I can never heal. You know, I hear students come and say that there's no hope for me now.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, no, 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 no. There's hope.
So one of the, I mean, how do you work with that when someone comes to you and they've really identified with their trauma story?
Well, I think first they need a lot of empathy, and I
Hmm.
give them a lot of empathy, and I allow them that time and space to tell their story and to really have someone hear them and feel them, because I think until that happens, we can't move forward. And that could take quite a long time to keep giving empathy and then training them to give them self-empathy. That's a really important part of that. But then there's a point in time that comes that we're going to decide, do we want to stay where we are? Is that a comfortable place to be in this life? And is that where you want to stay? Or would you like to see if there's new vistas, new ways of perceiving, new ways of thinking and being that might open the door a crack to a different reality for you? And are you willing to start moving in that direction?
Mm.
So that's why I came up with the optimal state, is because look, there is hope for all of us to get into our optimal state of balance so that we can have more viveka, more clarity, more ability to see the potentials for ourselves and move in a new direction. You know, Atha Yoga Anushasanam. We begin yoga, and we're hopefully going to go in a new direction that causes us less suffering.
Well, I think you just brought us home, Amy.
Great. It
Yeah.
was
So let's finish with the beginning of the Yoga Sutra. That's like a beautiful description. Again, thank you so much for spending this time and going on this journey with me. It's the way I kind of like to do it, is just show up, get curious, and see where it leads us. And I think it led us to some really interesting places today. And I'm just like, I find your perspective really interesting. I love the work that you're doing, and I hear the difficulty in being a bridge person. And I love that you're really taking all of it into consideration too. So it's just a lot of gratitude to you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Brian. And I just also want to say that I have always admired your work and kept an eye on you, and there's never ever been anything that I've saw of you that I wasn't like, wow, he is subtle, he is thoughtful, he is a good communicator. His heart is in the right place. So when you asked if I would be on here, I just felt so honored, because I feel like you're really living your yoga every moment. You're a very refined human being. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's funny because you've watched me online, and I can look back and over the past 8 years or whatever it's been since I started teaching, see, all this development, right?
Oh,
And I know like things are always like shifting for me, and I'm thinking about new ways of communicating things as I come to understand things more. So for me, I go, the past 8 years have been like kind of like a real development. And
which
so,
we all have, right?
yeah. Oh
But
yeah,
through
hopefully.
your development, you've been thoughtful and refined. That's the word that just keeps coming to me. You know,
Oh,
we all have mistakes. We all go up and down, but that essence of you, from what I see, is just a very subtle, refined human trying to do the best he can in any given moment of the day. And I really love that.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, let's do the housekeeping. How do people find out more about you? Where can they follow you to stay
Sure.
up to date on what you're doing?
My website is www.amywheeler.com, amywheeler.com. My Facebook is Amy Wheeler Yoga, but I also have an Optimal State Facebook page. I have an Instagram account, but I have to tell you, I'm not very good at it. So I'll work on that one, but that's also Amy Wheeler Yoga.
Hmm.
So yeah, come find me and be a unicorn with me.
Yeah. And just to tell people, you do online training as well, right?
I do. I do a lot of stuff online. I'm very into the tech world. My husband and I are coming out with an app to track your mental health in a very yogic way. That should be out within the next few months. Also, will be called Optimal State app. So, yeah, I love tech. I love being online. I feel like it's a great way to meet a lot of people.
Totally. And did I see correctly that you have a retreat center in Southern California?
We do. It is so beautiful. We love our retreat center. And when you were talking about coming together and actually having an experience with other human beings where there's something transmitted through osmosis, the place is magic. When you step into it, you're like, oh, and you kind of drop into this timeless space of communion together. It's just a really I think it's in like some weird energy vortex
Mm,
because people really feel different the moment they walk in the door. And our retreats are usually about a week, and so they have a really great opportunity to kind of de-link from all the crazy of their lives.
great. Now, something just came to me. I wonder, could that be a venue for a meeting of unicorns and lone wolves?
It absolutely could be the unicorn lone wolf hangout. Talk to me. Let's do it.
Well, we're in the middle of a blizzard right now in Montreal, and about this time of year, I get an itch to go to places like Southern California.
Okay, we're in. Let's do it next year. Let's set a date and we'll have a unicorn wolf meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many people like us out there who love this lineage, but don't feel that sense of communitas because Deskachar's not here, so there's not that central figure anymore that we can all gather around. Like the tribal fire that we all gather around. So I think it's up to us maybe to step up and to create spaces where we can get together and find nourishment through that connection and challenge each other to examine how we're teaching, where we're taking the lineage, how we're preserving it, all of that stuff. I don't know.
I'm in, Brian.
I don't see anyone else doing it. So I feel like I'm kind of like, I don't know, maybe stepping up or asking you to work with me. But I don't know. It was something I think I would really benefit from, and I'm sure there's others out there too who are looking for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I would 100% be in. The only reason I've never done that is because I don't feel like um, I don't feel like I have enough, uh, I don't know, power or whatever
Like
to
prominence or
yeah,
something. Yeah,
prominence to be able to call a meeting like that. But
I
if
know. But yeah.
other wolves and unicorns are like, hey, let's do it together. Well, sure, I'm all in for that.
Well, and I think that's the new way to do it, that it's not just the most famous of us who says, I'm going to have a gathering around me, right? And they're kind
Right,
of like
right.
grabbing the ring of power or something, right? Where it's like just people like us who aren't interested in taking that central role, and then together, like organizing and calling on our networks to find the other stray wolves and unicorns out there who are looking for kinship.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do this.
All right.
We're gonna plan something, and I'm gonna invite you and other lone wolves and unicorns from the Desikachar tradition.
Yeah, and I'm gonna leave this in the podcast so anyone listening who this is like making the hair on their arms stand up, because that's what I'm getting right now. Just the potential of this happening. and the excitement around that. So let us know. Get in touch with Amy or myself and let us know if this is something you might be interested in. And we'll look at maybe winter 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, I mean the dates are wide open, and I could even fathom like 2 weekends a year, depending if you can't make one, maybe you could make
Mm,
the other kind of thing. And that was my original plan, that I'd have like a winter retreat and a fall retreat or something like that, where people could come and nourish themselves and rejuvenate, but also be with other like-minded people in our tradition. So let's do it.
great. All right. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to let you go.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks.